Imagine a world where we had no control over the movements of our eyes. We would have to move our entire head in that direction to look at something new, something that would surely cause neck issues when playing video games. Luckily, we do have control over our eye movements, and the cranial nerves which innervate the extrinsic ocular muscles that move the eyeball are the occulomotor, trochlear, and abducens nerve, or cranial nerves 3, 4, and 6. First up, the oculomotor nerve has two main motor functions, a somatic motor function and a visceral motor or parasympathetic function, and there are different motor nuclei that control these two functions. So, the somatic motor function is controlled by the oculomotor nucleus, which is located in the midbrain, and the visceral motor function is controlled by the visceral motor accessory nucleus, or Edinger-Westphal nucleus, also located in the midbrain. The oculomotor nerve innervates 4 of the 6 extraocular muscles, namely the superior rectus, medial rectus, inferior rectus, and inferior oblique muscle. Thanks to this cranial nerve, we can direct our gaze superiorly, inferiorly, and medially. The oculomotor nerve also innervates the levator palpebrae superioris muscle, which lifts the superior eyelid. Parasympathetic innervation is provided through the ciliary ganglion to the smooth muscle of the sphincter pupillae, which causes constriction of the pupil, and to the ciliary body, which produces accommodation for near vision by relaxing the lens and allowing it to become more rounded. Now, the oculomotor emerges from the midbrain, pierces the dura mater lateral to the sellar diaphragm, or diaphragm sellae, and then runs through the roof and lateral wall of the cavernous sinus, and the oculomotor nerve enters the orbit through the superior orbital fissure. At this point, it divides into a superior division to innervate the superior rectus and levator palpebrae superioris muscles, and an inferior division to innervate the inferior rectus, medial rectus, and inferior oblique muscles. The inferior division also carries visceral efferent fibers to the ciliary ganglion, where they synapse. Postsynaptic fibers from the ciliary ganglion pass to the eyeball in the short ciliary nerves to innervate the ciliary body and the sphincter pupillae. Now, the optic nerve and the oculomotor nerve work together for 2 reflexes of the eye, which are the pupillary light reflex and the accommodation reflex. The optic nerve serves as the sensory or afferent pathway, and the oculomotor serves as the motor or efferent pathway. The pupillary light reflex is a reflex that controls the diameter of the pupil in response to light. When light enters either retina, it is sensed by the optic nerve, travels to the optic chiasm, then to the optic tract. The optic tract then sends a signal to a nucleus located in the midbrain called the pretectal nucleus. This nucleus then sends signals to both the right and left Edinger-Westphal nuclei located in the midbrain, and those signals travel along preganglionic parasympathetic fibers that exit with the oculomotor nerve and synapse with postganglionic parasympathetic neurons in the ciliary ganglion. Postganglionic nerve fibers leave the ciliary ganglion via short ciliary nerves to innervate the ciliary sphincter pupillae muscle of the iris to cause constriction. Therefore, shining a light in either eye should cause a reflexive constriction of the ipsilateral pupil called the direct pupillary light reflex, as well as the other pupil as well, called the consensual pupillary light reflex. This pupillary reflex is meant to constrict the pupil when there's plenty of light, so as to prevent more light from reaching the retina, and the strength of this reflex is dependent on the intensity of the light shining into the eye. The accommodation reflex, on the other hand, refers to the change in the shape of the lens of the eye in response to focusing on an object near or far away, similar to how a photographer changes their lens to take pictures on their camera. Like the pupillary reflex, the accommodation reflex has a sensory or afferent limb represented by the optic nerve and a motor or efferent limb represented by the oculomotor nerve. Now, this pathway starts with light hitting the retina, sending signals through the optic nerve, the optic chiasm, the optic tract, the lateral geniculate body, the optic radiation, and the visual cortex. After this long and winding road, signals are sent through the efferent limb of the pathway. First, they reach the superior colliculus in the midbrain, then the Edinger-Westphal nucleus, which sends signals to both the right and left oculomotor nerves and the parasympathetic nerve fibers that travel with the oculomotor nerve. The parasympathetic fibers synapse in the ciliary ganglion, then send ciliary nerves to the sphincter pupillae to contract the pupil, and to the ciliary body, which causes a sphincter-like contraction around the lens, which reduces tension and relaxes the lens, causing it to become thicker and more rounded. So, overall, during accommodation on objects close to our face, our pupils constrict, and our lens becomes thicker and more rounded. And when focusing on objects far away, our pupils dilate and our lens is thinner, because it's under more tension. Alright, now the trochlear nerve, or cranial nerve 4, is the smallest cranial nerve, and its only function is to provide motor innervation to one of the 6 extraocular muscles, the superior oblique muscle. Its nucleus is called the trochlear nucleus, and it's located in the midbrain. The trochlear nerve is the only cranial nerve that emerges from the posterior surface of the midbrain and has the longest course. The trochlear nerve pierces the dura mater at the margin of the tentorium cerebelli and passes anteriorly in the lateral wall of the cavernous sinus. It enters the orbit through the superior orbital fissure. The trochlear nerve supplies the superior oblique muscle, which abducts, depresses, and medially rotates the eye. To remember what the trochlear nerve innervates, remember trochlear means pulley in Latin, and that the superior oblique muscle passes through a structure called the trochlea, using it as a pulley for leverage when contracting. And finally, there's the abducens nerve, or cranial nerve 6, which also innervates a single extraocular muscle, the lateral rectus muscle. The abducens nucleus is located in the pons, and the nerve emerges from the brainstem between the pons and the medulla. Each nerve then pierces the dura to run the longest intradural course within the cranial cavity of all the cranial nerves, eventually passing through the cavernous sinus. It enters the orbit through the superior orbital fissure, running on and penetrating the medial surface of the lateral rectus muscle, which abducts the eye to direct the pupil away from the nose. Alright, as a quick recap, cranial nerve 3, or the oculomotor nerve, has 2 functions. A somatic motor function controlled by the oculomotor nucleus located in the midbrain, and a visceral motor or parasympathetic function controlled by the Edinger-Westphal nucleus located in the midbrain. The oculomotor nerve provides motor innervation to 4 of the 6 extraocular muscles, the superior rectus, medial rectus, inferior rectus, and inferior oblique, as well as to the levator palpebrae superioris muscle, and also provides parasympathetic innervation to cause constriction of the sphincter pupillae and ciliary body. The oculomotor nerve, along with the optic nerve, ensure the functioning of 2 important reflexes of the eye, the pupillary light reflex, which controls the pupil diameter in response to light, and the accommodation reflex, which helps change the lens shape to focus on objects at different distances. Cranial nerve 4, or the trochlear nerve, innervates the superior oblique muscle, and cranial nerve 6, or the abducens nerve, innervates the lateral rectus muscle.